New weapons, thorough training, well-equipped soldiers. The Russian armed forces are back. In 2008, the Kremlin announced a far-reaching reform for the Russian army, launching an investment program in rearmament and modernization of over 700 billion euros to resurrect what had largely become a used-up force. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 threw the Russian military into a deep crisis.
The Russian armed forces are considerably smaller than the old Soviet forces. They may not be as threatening, but they are more efficient. Officers and men are better trained, paid good wages, and have really useful equipment.
On average, a lieutenant earns 900 euros a month, which is not bad by Russian standards. The Kremlin uses the new clout of its revitalized armed forces to regain its status as a great power on the international stage and force through its interests. The annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, the crisis of East Ukraine, and the war in Syria are just a few examples. A strong army is very much to the taste of the majority of Russia's population. The propaganda machine feeds the desire of many for a return to former greatness. A development not without its dangers, according to Kremlin-critical military experts.
I have never heard or seen anything like it. Sociologists I trust have conducted a study and came to the conclusion that a certain section of Russia's population actually wants war, or dreams of war, or wants to utilize war to solve problems.
Conflict resolution with military help. A prime example is the Crimea. A major maneuver involving some 12,000 troops is being held on the annexed Ukrainian peninsula in the Black Sea. Here, in early 2014, the army first proved it had regained its ability to take action. Out of the blue, Russian troops without insignia occupied all strategic sites. The Ukraine, the EU, and the USA were all taken completely by surprise. Shortly afterwards, the Kremlin organized a referendum, condemned in the West as in breach of international law, and integrated the Crimea into the Russian Federation. Economic sanctions against Moscow soon followed, but couldn't force the Kremlin to change course. The army invited Western media reporters to the peninsula and gave a clear message: hands off the Crimea.
We are ready to repel any aggression, whether by sabotage commandos or any other party. Foolish ideas can be had by many.
The Russian army has around 800,000 soldiers in active service and an annual budget of some 60 billion euros. In the worldwide military strength ranking, experts put Russia's forces in second place, far behind the United States.
The demographic and economic situation means that the Russian army cannot grow into a huge force of millions like the Soviet army was. But that fact's being ignored. Many people are allowing themselves to be blinded by the successes in the Crimea, eastern Ukraine, and the war in Syria. This has given rise to euphoria. Both population and leadership believe the army is up to any task.
А Россия ввязалась в военное противостояние с Западом.
We are in a military conflict with the West, and this conflict requires far more troops than Russia can raise. Putin and Defense Minister Shoigu said that 3 new divisions will be deployed on the west flank. If you add all these announcements together, you come to about 15 divisions. Where are we going to get all the soldiers for that? The army is only planned to grow by 10,000 this year. Once again, we're forming divisions on paper, just like the Soviet and Russian armies did before the reform.
Что эти новые дивизии будут бумажные, как они были в советской и российской армии до реформы.
In Russia, critical voices like military expert Goltz are often branded destructive detractors. Destination Syria. There, the military can again demonstrate its strengths: mobility, flexibility, speed. In summer 2015, President Putin approved the rapid construction of an airbase near Latakia. The Kremlin head successfully comes to the aid of his beleaguered ally, Syrian dictator Assad. An intervention that also takes the West by surprise.
In the Kremlin, they believe any problem can be solved this way. Just frighten everyone, and it will work. And the West just lets them get away with it.
This military intervention in Syria catapults Putin back into the international arena and heralds the end of the isolation he had maneuvered himself into with his annexation of the Crimea. The army as an extremely effective instrument of foreign policy. Russian generals tried to deflect from this by presenting the intervention primarily as an anti-terror mission.
We are fighting against terrorists, the IS, the Al-Nusra Front, and others.
Russia regards all opponents of Syrian ruler Assad as terrorists. Spearheading the fight against them is the Sukhoi fleet of combat jets, old and new models working hand in hand. The Kremlin chief believes Syria is an ideal training ground for his military machine. And they are particularly proud of the Su-34 fighter bomber.
After launch, the air-to-ground missiles are guided precisely to their targets to within half a meter. It's also equipped with air-to-air missiles. This aircraft is a complete all-rounder.
The heavy Su-34 tactical strike fighter has been in series production since 2006. It's armed with cruise missiles, an autocannon, guided and unguided bombs, and has a maximum weapons load of 8,200 kilos. The Russian Air Force has at least 85 Su-34s.
Тремя вещами. Во-первых, у них больше бомбовая нагрузка.
This aircraft has 3 advantages. Firstly, it can carry a very large weapons load. Secondly, these are primarily so-called intelligent weapons and are high precision. Thirdly, these machines take a lot of the strain off the pilots because they're full of high technology and artificial intelligence.
И во вторую очередь это машины все-таки и в последнюю
The Sukhoi 34 is a genuine multi-role aircraft. It can do everything, unlike the old Su-25, which is only suitable for ground combat, or the Su-24 bomber, the type that was shot down by Turkey.
Но эти самолеты, даже если это бомбардировщик, он в состоянии вести воздушный бой.
There's also another remarkable Sukhoi aircraft, the Su-35, an air superiority fighter. This is another all-rounder. These are machines with a future.
И за ними будущее. Все-таки эти самолеты несут все родимые пятна.
But nevertheless, these aircraft also have their weaknesses. They were designed in the Soviet era, and the materials used were not suitable for compact construction. That's why the Sukhois are relatively large and heavy. A smaller American model can carry the same weapons payload as a large Russian one.
Самолет несет такую же бомбовую нагрузку.
Some American aircraft only have one engine. We have two because our engines are not as powerful. They're less economical and have shorter lifespans.
По критерию экономичность по сроку службы.
And the pilots often need a long time to learn how to handle these complicated machines.
Технику современному человеку сложно освоить.
Recognizing weaknesses and eliminating them. In the eyes of the military, the Syrian campaign is ideal for this too. In combat, the Sukhois can best show where improvements need to be made. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International accuse Russia of indiscriminately bombing civilians as well. The army deny this and speak of anti-Russian propaganda. Significant progress has been made in communications and reconnaissance, which is of great relevance for the Syrian war. These tanker trucks are allegedly on their way to Turkey.
We can see precisely how much oil the terrorists are producing and selling to the smugglers. They use that money subsequently to carry out attacks all over the world.
In Syria, Russia is expanding its Latakia air base. The Kremlin expects their involvement to be long-term. To protect the troops and the Air Force, the Army is deploying its best air defense systems, most notably the S-400 Triumph. This system can intercept fighter jets, cruise missiles, short and long-range missiles in all weather conditions and at virtually any altitude. Russia moved the S-400 to Syria after Turkey shot down a Sukhoi 24 at the end of 2015. Claiming that the Russian bomber had entered Turkish airspace. With the aid of this air defense system, Russia can establish a no-fly zone over large parts of Syria at any time.
The possibilities the S-400 offers are colossal. It can track up to 300 targets and simultaneously engage 36.
Наносить удар по 36 целям.
Maximum range, 400 kilometers. Maximum interception altitude, 27 kilometers.
С-400 замечательная система, дальнейшее продолжение в значительной степени.
The S-400 is an excellent weapon. It's an upgrade of the legendary S-300.
Разный набор ракет.
We have 3 different missiles in the S-400 system: short, medium, and long range, and depending on the target and the distance, different missiles are deployed.
На дальних подступах или на средних, или уже при приближении к
The system is successful, and consequently it's in great demand on the weapons market.
очень удачная, поэтому столь востребованная.
China has already bought it. With India, negotiations are ongoing, and Turkey has also expressed its interest.
Меморандум о желании ее купить
I'm quite sure it will be a big seller, just like the S-300 was.
с Турцией о возможной поставке туда, поэтому это, безусловно, будет таким же хитом на мировом рынке, как система С-300.
As even Kremlin-critical military experts in Russia admit, the S-400 is very probably the world's best air defense system.
С-400 воспринимается на Западе более чем всерьез.
The S-400 is being taken very seriously in the West. At the NATO summit in Warsaw, a statement was made declaring that any no-fly zones established by the S-400 would not be tolerated. But what can they do about it? In the Balkans, on the Crimea, in Kamchatka, or even in Syria, the de facto existence of no-fly zones has already been established.
И в Крыму, и на Камчатке эти бесполетные зоны, и в Сирии эти бесполетные зоны де-факто уже существуют.
In a no-fly zone like this, Western jets risk being shot down at any time once they venture within the operational range of the S-400. And right next to it is its little brother, Pantsir.
У нас система ПВО многоуровневая.
Our air defense systems have different tasks. The role of the S-400 is to bring down everything that's far away. And whenever the S-400 lets anything through, the Pantsir comes into play.
The Pantsir's range is between 1 and 20 kilometers. The system is equipped with 2 autocannon guns and a total of 12 anti-aircraft missiles. Russia also has a very efficient anti-ship weapons system deployed in Syria.
В случае обострения ситуации обеспечивает.
Should the situation escalate, NATO aircraft will not be able to fly because of the no-fly zone that we've already mentioned. On top of this, there's also the fact that no ships will be able to approach the Syrian coast. They will be prevented from doing so by the Bastion complex. Its operational range covers an area of 150,000 square kilometers. That roughly corresponds to a stretch of coast measuring 600 kilometers long and 300 kilometers wide.
600 километров побережья и 300 километров вглубь моря.
Bastion S-400 Pantsir. The Russian army in Syria is quite obviously very well defended. In addition to these defense systems, there are also the attack helicopters armed with mobile ground-to-air missiles, which have the task of protecting aircraft from terrorists during takeoff or landing. The Mi-28, also known as the Night Hunter, has to prove itself in Latakia and other provinces as both a defensive and an offensive weapon. Syria is also an ideal showcase for the Russian arms industry. This heavy armored attack helicopter travels at 320 kilometers an hour and flies sideways and backwards at up to 100 kilometers an hour. The Mi-28 is equipped with an autocannon, guided missiles, aerial bombs, and air-to-ground missiles. Night hunters appear out of the darkness at high speed, destroy their targets, and disappear again just as quickly to avoid being hit by mobile ground-to-air missiles. A combat scene in the Syrian desert near Palmyra.
Number 1, get him. Shoot. There's another one. Let's go.
Look out. I'll keep him in my sights. Got him, got him, got him. Good.
Отрабатывайте по этому зданию, кто видит.
Mi-28s destroy an IS convoy.
Ему тяжело очень, его двигательные установки тяжело в жарком и песчаном.
The helicopters have a hard time in the desert with the heat and sand. The Mi-24 helicopter had similar difficulties when it was first deployed in the Afghanistan war. So based on these experiences, the helicopters are being improved. Just how good the Mi-28's weapon systems are is difficult to say. Shooting at relatively badly armed terrorists is one thing, but being confronted with a high-tech enemy is quite another. The latter is definitely not the case in Syria.
An air show in the region around Moscow. The Mi-28 is actually considered reliable, but accidents do happen. Quite suddenly, the rear rotor appears to fail. One of the two pilots survives the crash, probably due to the energy-absorbing landing gear.
A helicopter is a mechanism that man has forced to fly. According to the laws of physics, it shouldn't be able to fly at all. A helicopter is much more prone to accidents than an aircraft, and unfortunately, even small defects can cause a helicopter to crash. That's the same the world over. And it happens regularly.
A Mi-28 secures a military parade on the airbase near Latakia. Around 4,000 Russian troops are stationed in Syria, though their numbers vary depending on the operational situation. They're mainly Air Force personnel, but ground troops, in particular special forces, are also deployed. These men are armed with the legendary Kalashnikov. We're now on our way to Izhevsk, the home of the most famous rifle in the world. Lieutenant General Mikhail Kalashnikov, the inventor of the AK-47 assault rifle. AK stands for Avtomat Kalashnikova. Until recently, the production plant still looked like this. An outdated and dilapidated old factory hall with dissatisfied workers and wage payments often delayed for months. Even Kalashnikov himself could do nothing about this. But then the state invested billions, breathing new life into the antiquated company.
That's what it looked like here just 6 months ago. Problems with the microclimate, sloping floors, and bad working conditions. We managed this historic renovation without stopping production. And this is what it looks like now. No more sloping floors, clean workstations mounted on wheels. This is important, so that we can move them to other locations if we want to change the production procedure. The tables must be fixable and coated with rubber to prevent metal splinters causing scratches or injuries. As I said, we carried on with production during the entire renovation phase to make sure the orders were ready on time and to keep turnover high. Yes, and we've also gained quite a lot of space by throwing out old machines that weren't being used anymore. We now have 20% more space. In my view, the modernization program has been a great success.
At Kalashnikov, the order books are full. Russia's largest firearms manufacturer is back in the black. Last year, the net profit made by the state-owned company was an impressive 31 million euros, after a loss of 5 million euros the previous year. New machines allow production to cover a much greater variety, which in turn allows a much more flexible response to customers' wishes. Rifles for armies, police forces, hobby and sports marksmen. The increased flexibility is seen as the greatest achievement of the modernization process.
What's special about our company is that we are completely self-sufficient. We make almost everything. No, actually, we make everything ourselves. Every component in our weapons. That's where we differ from many European companies. They often cooperate with suppliers, but that's unacceptable for us, because we want to control the quality of the individual parts at every stage of production. I think that's the biggest difference between us and European companies.
Этим самым мы обеспечиваем качество и контроль на каждом этапе технологического процесса. В этом мы отличаемся.
The Kalashnikov company is being extended further. Here, a new design office has been constructed. For the Kremlin, the arms industry once again has absolute priority. There are plenty of signs pointing to a new arms race with the USA, something which experts criticize as a pointless undertaking.
An arms race is something Russia cannot win, because it all depends on a country's economic potential. The longer the race goes on, the more difficult it will become for us. Perhaps our elites hope that the West will just give up, but I don't see that happening.
No hope of winning the arms race. Russian arms companies don't get involved in political discussions. They just enjoy the flow of money from the top echelons. New models undergo meticulous testing. The Kalashnikov chief designer shows us his favorite, the semi-automatic designated marksman's rifle, SVK.
Значит, особенностью конструктива является длинная, тонкая ствол.
The special feature is the long, slim barrel housing. It serves as the connecting link for all elements of the weapon. Magazine, case cover, breech frame, or the shoulder rest are all attached to it. We've designed the rifle in such a way that it can be adapted to individual requirements by exchanging individual elements.
Выстроить на этой основе достаточно большой диапазон различных видов стрелкового оружия.
Special forces in the Army and Police worked with the company on the development of the SVK. The sniper rifle works with both Russian and NATO ammunition. The SVK is currently still in the test phase, and the focus is on achieving accuracy under maximum stress.
And what's your impression?
It's a good sniper rifle.
What defects does it still have?
Every defect is evaluated and eliminated. It's a long process, seriously, but it's all about getting the rifle to work perfectly.
Defects and weaknesses are not something the company likes to speak about, especially not with Western camera crews. We're only allowed to film in the firearms sector. All other areas in the Kalashnikov company are off limits. State secrets. At the Patriot Arms exhibition in Moscow, however, we do manage to get some footage of the new Soratnik combat robot. Soratnik means companion and is used for reconnaissance, providing fire support in combat situations or guarding sections of terrain. The Soratnik can carry out tasks independently, but can also be remote controlled via a console. It's armed with machine guns, a grenade launcher, and Kornet anti-tank missiles.
Калашников в настоящий момент это не фирма, производящая стрелковое оружие.
Kalashnikov has long since ceased to be a pure firearms manufacturer. It's a conglomerate that's also trying to gain a foothold in the civilian sector. Kalashnikov produces the Sturm and attack missiles for the Pantsir air defense system. In addition, Kalashnikov also builds speedboats for special forces. And the company produces the Soratnik combat robot. Its undercarriage is built in Mytishi near Moscow. The drone sector is also a new venture. Kalashnikov wants to become the market leader in Russia for every type of automated war technology. Drones, combat robots, everything.
Самолет без пилота, танк без, или там специальная машина без оператора.
On the international arms market, the Kremlin is the world's #2 behind the United States. The Russian arms industry has an annual turnover of around 15 billion euros. At the Patriot Trade Fair, Defense Minister Shoigu is satisfied.
We have achieved a lot. We've done a lot of rebuilding and have introduced new systems. This is no longer just a great unorthodox effort. We are researching, improving, and producing in series with very good materials.
This great effort is being acknowledged by customers. China, India, African, and South American states all have orders in place amounting to some 50 billion euros for fighter jets, tanks, and air defense systems. But in the critical view of military expert Alexander Goltz, the arms sector could generate even more money.
В середине прошлого десятилетия под руководством Путина произошла реформа.
The reform of the arms industry began under Putin in the mid-2000s. The sector is a caricature of what we had in Soviet times. In the Soviet Union, there were the famous 9 beacons, something like 9 individual war ministries, vertically integrated organizations that did absolutely everything, from the extraction of raw materials to the finished product. Today's state holding companies are to operate according to the same principle like the United Shipbuilding Companies, Almas Antai, Rostec. But they are all terribly inefficient, ideal places for embezzlement.
Они представляют собой идеальное место для уворовывания денег. Не случайно, встречаясь с...
When Putin meets the bosses of the arms holding companies, he demands that the flows of money be much better controlled. He draws up new laws to curb the large-scale theft. But there is no public control, so the corruption continues to flourish.
Каким-то образом избежать воровства. Но поскольку эта зона находится абсолютно вне общественного контроля, то и воровство продолжает процветать.
The head of the Kremlin, one of the most powerful men in the world, powerless. Putin puts a brave face on it. The arms industry is too important. It is, after all, the strongest foreign policy argument he has. Pressure, threats, intimidation. That's often how the president makes his voice heard internationally.
В текущем году
This year, our nuclear forces will be upgraded with an additional 40 new intercontinental rockets. They will be able to overcome any defense system, no matter how modern it is.
Флаг Российской Федерации и знамя победы! Смирно! Для встречи слева!
Once a year, the Kremlin chief shows the world his mobile ICBMs. On May 9th, Russia traditionally celebrates the victory over Nazi Germany with a huge military parade. The Topol-M, a mobile intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead and a range of 11,000 kilometers. The Russian military's most recent top nuclear missile looks very similar to the Topol-M. Experts say the RS-24 is based on the Topol-M. The biggest difference between the two weapons is that the RS-24 Yars can carry multiple nuclear warheads. Allegedly, 4 in all. In Dmitry Oreshkin's view, this represents a threat to world peace.
Our current age is very different from the time the Soviet Union collapsed. The state knew at that time exactly what a world war meant. Today, there are men in power who don't know this from their own experience. This can lead to recklessness spreading. Someone gets scared and starts an avalanche. Under Vladimir Putin, things often happen that no one expects. Or did anyone see the Crimean annexation coming? Or the war in East Ukraine? Or the intervention in Syria? Putin is unpredictable and proud of it, because he sees this characteristic as an ace up his sleeve in dealings with the West. I'm not saying Putin will press the red button, but I wouldn't want to rule it out 100% either.
Russia's nuclear forces comprise at least 83 RS-24 Yars intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Russia and the USA have roughly the same number of nuclear warheads, but the Americans have 30% more delivery systems. And once we've taken our old SS-18s out of service, this gap will grow even further. That's why we're currently developing new missiles, Zrubesh and Sarmat. They're supposed to be capable of carrying dozens of warheads. And there's also another modern weapons system capable of being armed with nuclear warheads, a tactical missile called the Iskander-M. It flies on an extremely flat, semi-ballistic trajectory, which it can change repeatedly to deceive air defense systems. This weapon appears to comply with the terms of the INF Treaty, which prohibits intermediate-range missiles. Its range is said to be less than 500 kilometers, but there are always statements hinting at the fact that the Iskander is capable of being upgraded.
Однако периодически намекают, что при необходимости у Искандера может быть и увеличена эта дальность.
Joining these modern missile systems is also a new type of tank, the T-14 Armata. Its special feature is its remote-controlled unmanned gun turret. Reloading is automatic. Ceramic armor, radar systems, armaments, and speed clearly make the T-14 the best tank in the world.
он маленький, да, соответственно, если танк небольшой, его
It's
сложнее
actually quite
поражать.
small, which makes it more difficult to hit. An important feature is the tank's compact armored capsule inside the hull, directly behind the strong armor plating at the front. This protects the crew if the tank takes a hit.
Вот. Ну и еще очень хочется надеяться, что этот танк будет...
Hopefully, this weapon will be affordable. As I said before, new systems are extremely expensive, and the strength of our economy doesn't allow us to supply the army with overpriced tanks.
Новых поколений очень дорогие, да.
We haven't as much money at our disposal as Germany or other countries in the West.
Потому что все-таки
And we can't simply plunder the budget and pay doctors or teachers next to nothing, as the Soviet Union did.
в Германии или в других западных странах мы не можем позволить себе выдернуть все деньги из государственного бюджета, с зарплат учителей, с зарплат врачей, и пустить это на оружие, как это сделал Советский Союз.
Back to the Middle East. Besides their air base, the Russian armed forces also have a naval base in Syria, at Tartus, on the Mediterranean coast. The Kremlin has 11 warships anchored in the port itself and off the Syrian coast. The Syria campaign is increasingly being fought on the information front. The international media are suddenly being allowed access to highly sensitive areas. The message from the army leadership is clear. We are back. Torpedoes, rockets, and cruise missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Russian soldiers refer to the guided missile cruiser Moskva as the floating fortress.
The purpose of the cruiser is to destroy enemy ships on the high seas. Particular targets are aircraft carriers and their escort ships. In addition, this cruiser also protects the ships in our own Russian fleet.
The Moskva carries the air defense system known as Fort, the sea-based equivalent of the renowned S-300.
This is the Fort missile defense system. And there are two things we do with it here. We protect our own ships and secure our airbase in the Syrian Arab Republic.
In these shafts, the air defense missiles stand ready for launch.
Fort can intercept cruise missiles, fighter jets, and rockets within a range of 75 kilometers. It can engage objects at altitudes of up to 25 kilometers.
The military organize a guided tour of the ship for foreign journalists to show off their muscle. A quintuple torpedo launcher.
Our anti-ship torpedoes reach a top speed of 40 knots. You can see them now being brought into position. This facility is installed on both sides of the ship.
The Asa, which means wasp, is mainly used as a defense against fighter jets and attack helicopters at low and medium engagement altitudes.
The Osa is a guided missile defense system which is installed on both sides of the ship. There are 20 missiles on board with a range of 15 kilometers.
The missiles appear to be in good condition, but they're certainly not new. The Moskva is no more than a heavily armed relic from the Soviet era. Most of the Russian Army's weapons systems are merely modifications, based on the achievements of Soviet designers. The cruiser's highlight is the Basalt, a cruise missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead.
The Basalt is also a guided missile system. You can see the launch shafts open up here on my left. It travels at supersonic speed, also hits targets on land, and has a range of 500 kilometers.
16 Basalt cruise missiles are in permanent combat readiness. Critics see this as no more than military posturing.
У меня большие сомнения в их эффективности. Потому что крылатые ракеты...
What we want with cruise missiles in the fight against gangs of terrorists is something I just don't know. And then we still have the old aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov sailing around. To me, that just seems completely inefficient.
Авианесущий крейсер «Адмирал Кузнецов», чья эффективность чрезвычайно низка. Боевая эффективность.
There's probably only one area in which the Russian military is still vastly inferior to the USA, and that's aircraft carriers. Russia only has one, and it doesn't have the best reputation. Very prone to breakdowns, the outdated Admiral Kuznetsov is usually accompanied by a tug, just in case the old steam turbines decide to malfunction. The Kuznetsov came off the slipway in 1985. Footage from the war in Syria showing the Su-33 on a combat mission. What poses the most difficult challenge is landing on the relatively short 306-meter ship. Again and again, brake cables snap and send a jet crashing into the sea. But even the frequently criticized aircraft carrier is armed with extremely deadly weapons systems. One such example is the guided anti-ship missile Granite, which can be fitted with thermonuclear warheads. Sailing right alongside the old Kuznetsov is a brand new frigate, armed with Putin's prestige cruise missile system, the Kaliber. This precision weapon can hit ground targets from a distance of 2,600 kilometers.
Боевая тревога! Корабль к бою!
Mobile phone footage shows a Kaliber over Syria. Its cruise trajectory varies between altitudes of 150 and 20 meters. Its accuracy is said to be between 5 and 10 meters.
У «Калибра» есть экспортная версия, которая называется «Клуб».
The export version of the Kaliber is called Club. It's sold in combination with submarines. Around 10 countries have already made such a purchase. A land-based version is currently being manufactured. Russia has always had good rocket designers. This system is the long arm of Putin, either as a preventive weapon or as an instrument of revenge.
The cruise missile can be equipped with a 500-kilogram fragmentation warhead, cluster munitions, or a nuclear warhead. The Russian army has been resurrected. Its condition may not be ideal, but it's strong enough to reinstate Putin's Russia as a great power on the international stage.